The morning sun burned gold across the parade field at Naval Station Norfolk, illuminating the precise rows of 1,440 troops standing at attention. Every boot, every medal, every straightened uniform glinted with meticulous care. The air smelled faintly of polished brass and freshly laundered dress blues. Birds circled lazily above, seemingly oblivious to the tension growing on the ground. Chief Petty Officer Mason Hale strode along the front row, tall, broad-shouldered, every inch the legendary Navy SEAL he was known to be. His medals clinked softly as he moved, and his eyes swept the formation with a confidence born of years in combat zones most civilians would never fathom. To the men and women standing at attention, Hale was untouchable, a man who had faced insurgents, booby traps, and machine gun fire without flinching. On the base, his reputation preceded him like an invisible shield: brave, unyielding, arrogant. Lieutenant Elena Vargas, an Army military police officer, stepped onto the field with precise authority, clipboard in hand, scanning the formation like a hawk. Her boots clicked against the pavement in perfect rhythm with the silence of the troops. She had spent years rising through the ranks of military police, known for her discipline, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to the rules. She noticed things others ignored: the slight lean in a soldier's posture, a scuffed boot, a metal ribbon not quite straight. Her eyes finally landed on Hale, standing slightly off-kilter in the front row, shoulders squared but a fraction too far forward. "Elena," whispered a sergeant standing nearby, "you know who you're dealing with, right? That man doesn't answer to anyone." Elena's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained calm, professional, and clear. She raised her clipboard and called across the field, "Chief Hale, adjust your position. Align with the second row." For a moment Hale did not respond. He didn't blink. He didn't shift. The formation felt like it held its collective breath. The sunlight reflected off his medals, and for a split second he seemed larger than life, an immovable force of pride and reputation. Troops whispered to each other quietly, their curiosity barely contained. Who would move first, the legend or the law? Hale turned his head slowly toward her, the faintest smirk playing on his lips. The field felt electrically charged, tension rippling outward like waves. Everyone could feel it, the clash of authority versus ego about to unfold. No one moved, but every pair of eyes followed the exchange, anticipating a storm. He stepped forward, boots striking the concrete with deliberate weight, his chest rising as if to physically push the air back around him. Leaning slightly toward Elena, he whispered just loud enough for her to hear, the words carrying a dangerous undertone, "Remember, I'm a Navy SEAL." The formation shifted slightly. A few of the nearest soldiers froze mid-breath, recognizing the tension in that simple statement. It wasn't a reminder, it was a warning, a challenge, an assertion that experience and medals outranked regulation and order. Elena's posture did not falter. Her eyes, steady and unyielding, met his. "And I'm enforcing regulations," she said evenly, her voice carrying just enough for the surrounding troops to hear. "Adjust your position, Chief, now." Hale's eyes narrowed. Years of battlefield respect and unquestioned authority had not prepared him for this. She was not intimidated. She did not flinch. And in front of 1,440 witnesses, the challenge could not be ignored. Hale's pride flared like fuel thrown on a fire. His lips curled into a tight grin, and he stepped closer. "Do you even know who you're talking to?" he hissed, just beneath the level of conversation that might attract official reprimand. "I've been to places you couldn't imagine. I've seen things that would make you freeze in terror. I've led missions where lives depended on me alone. I've earned the right to stand where I want, do what I want." Elena's voice cut through the implied threat with calm authority. "And I've earned the right to enforce the rules. Your record does not exempt you from responsibility, Chief. Position, now." The words hung in the air. Silence pressed in on everyone. The crowd of 1,440 troops stood as statues, their collective breaths caught between anticipation and disbelief. It wasn't just two officers exchanging words. It was a clash of worlds. Battlefield experience versus structured discipline, ego versus protocol, legend versus law. Hale's fists clenched at his sides. He had never been challenged like this. In the field, soldiers followed him without question. In training, his will was absolute. But here, before the eyes of the entire base, no amount of medals, no amount of combat history could sway her. She was immovable. The aura of command she radiated was something he had not encountered. Around the field, murmurs spread quietly through the ranks. Some soldiers wondered if he would comply. Others silently admired her courage. A sergeant muttered under his breath, "She's going to make him pay for that one." Hale's lips tightened. His chest rose and fell rapidly. He was itching for confrontation, but he was also calculating. He knew any reckless move would be observed. His reputation, while formidable, had no armor against rules enforced by authority in front of this many witnesses. Yet pride is a powerful motivator. Hale's eyes flicked toward the assembled troops. He imagined the whispering voices behind those lines, imagining his fall if he obeyed too quickly. He leaned closer again, voice low, dangerous. "Remember, I'm a Navy SEAL," he said again, louder this time. Alina didn't move, she didn't flinch. Her response was precise, unwavering, and unshakable. "Chief Hale, adjust your position, or I will have to escalate." The field seemed to hold its breath. Birds ceased their circling. The wind stilled. Somewhere deep in that moment, the legend of Mason Hale faced something far more terrifying than any battlefield. Someone unafraid of him, someone who knew that strength without control is nothing, and that discipline is absolute. And in that suspended tension, the first sparks of a confrontation that would shake the base to its core were quietly igniting. The tension on the parade field was palpable. 1,440 troops stood in rigid attention, their eyes forward, their minds unable to tear themselves from the unfolding confrontation. The morning sun glared off polished boots, brass buttons, and Hale's medals, as if nature itself were spotlighting the brewing storm. Chief Petty Officer Mason Hale's ego simmered like a powder keg, ready to explode. Lieutenant Alina Vargas's composure, however, was a steady dam, holding back the flood of chaos that could erupt at any moment. After Hale's whispered warning, "Remember, I'm a Navy SEAL," the field had gone silent, save for the faint rustle of wind and the distant hum of a helicopter preparing for training exercises. The phrase wasn't a casual boast. It was a weapon, meant to intimidate, to remind everyone of the danger, the power, and the fame attached to Hale's name. The SEAL reputation, built on bravery, skill, and deadly precision, had always shielded him. His service record had let him bend rules, intimidate superiors, and command obedience. Until now. Alina's eyes did not flicker. Her jaw was set. Her voice remained calm. "Chief Hale, adjust your position immediately," she said, clipboard tapping gently against her side as if emphasizing her authority. Every word was deliberate, every syllable measured. She knew that hesitation, uncertainty, or wavering would embolden him, and the thousands of troops watching could sense her confidence radiating outward, grounding the field in order even as the tension mounted. Hale's hands twitched at his sides. He had faced combat, enemy fire, ambushes, and situations where lives rested on his decisions. Yet this was different. A battlefield had rules and chaos alike. Here, the rules were absolute, and Alina Vargas was not swayed by reputation or medals. Every instinct told him to assert dominance, to demonstrate that he, the legendary SEAL, could not be corrected by an army officer, especially not one in her early 30s, whose rise through military police had earned her respect but not yet infallibility in his eyes. A murmur ran through the formation, nearly imperceptible but unmistakable. Soldiers exchanged glances. Some had seen Hale's temper before. Some had quietly wondered whether anyone could actually stand up to him. And yet, here she was, unflinching, a wall of discipline and principle confronting the living embodiment of battlefield pride. Hale leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice so only she could hear, yet loud enough that the nearest soldiers caught every word. "Do you even understand who you're talking to?" His tone was sharp, menacing, and dripping with arrogance. "I've survived deployments you couldn't even imagine. I've been in situations where every second meant life or death. Soldiers depend on me. I don't answer to orders from anyone. I certainly don't answer to you." Alina's gaze did not waver. She matched his intensity with her own unyielding authority. "And I enforce orders for every soldier on this base," she said, voice steady, controlled, carrying the weight of the regulations she had sworn to uphold. "Your reputation does not grant immunity, Chief. You will align with the formation now, or I will have to escalate this situation." Hale's pride flared like a live fuse. Every word, every rule, every ounce of his authority was being challenged publicly. He had expected fear, obedience, or at least hesitation. He had expected the troops to watch silently, awed by his courage and daring. What he hadn't expected was this: Alina Vargas, unwavering, refusing to acknowledge his intimidation tactics. She was a mirror he had never encountered, someone whose courage and discipline made his own arrogance irrelevant. The formation felt the shift. Soldiers straightened, sensing that the tension wasn't just between two officers. It was a test of principle versus ego, of law versus legend. Many thought silently that Hale had never lost in front of an audience. Never publicly. Certainly not to someone outside his own chain of command. And now, thousands of eyes were fixed on him, waiting for his next move. Hale clenched his fists at his sides, his breathing growing slightly heavier. Anger, frustration, and disbelief mingled. His mind raced, calculating how to assert control without breaking regulations in front of witnesses, how to protect his reputation, and how to intimidate her into compliance. Every instinct screamed at him. Assert dominance, show power, remind everyone why he was feared, and everything else would fall in line. Alina, however, had anticipated this. Years of training had taught her that ego is a weapon and that a calm mind could dismantle it. She did not step back, did not falter, and did not allow herself to be baited. The very act of standing firm in front of him, in front of the entire formation, was a calculated show of authority. She knew the audience, every soldier, every officer, every witness, would remember not just the confrontation but how it was handled, and her handling was flawless. The tension stretched, seconds dragging like minutes. Hale's eyes scanned the formation. He saw soldiers shifting slightly, some whispering under their breath. Some admired him. Some admired her. None were laughing. None were cheering. Everyone was frozen, suspended in anticipation. Somewhere in that field of 1,440 troops, someone realized that what was about to happen would redefine the rules of respect on this base. Finally, Hale exhaled through clenched teeth, voice rising slightly. "You think rules matter more than skill, experience, lives saved under fire?" His tone was sharp, defiant. "I've earned my place here, don't forget it." Alina's response was measured, precise. "And I've earned the right to enforce the law. Your place here does not exempt you from it. Adjust your position. Now." The words were a gauntlet. Hale's pride bristled. Silence fell across the field again, heavier than before. Even the birds above seemed to pause. Every pair of eyes watched. Every mind considered what would happen next. Would the legend bend, retreat, or lash out? Somewhere deep in the tension, the first sparks of what would become a historic confrontation began to ignite. An event that would ripple through the base, across careers, and embed itself into the memories of every soldier who witnessed it. The battle lines had been drawn. Not on a foreign battlefield, but in the discipline, pride, and principle that governed military life. And neither Hale nor Alina had yet made the first move that would determine who would truly stand victorious. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long, sharp shadows across the parade field at Naval Station Norfolk. 1,440 troops remained frozen in formation, every boot planted, every uniform impeccable. The air was taut, thick with anticipation, the kind that precedes conflict. The murmurs of the previous exchanges had died down. The field now held its collective breath. Eyes darted between Chief Petty Officer Mason Hale and Lieutenant Elena Vargas, both locked in a battle of authority, pride, and principle. Hale's pride had grown into frustration. Every instinct he had developed in years of combat, where aggression and decisiveness saved lives, urged him to assert dominance. He had been tested countless times under fire, had led men through ambushes, and had survived situations where hesitation meant death. And yet here he was, challenged publicly by a single officer, and it felt worse than any firefight he had endured. The humiliation, compounded by thousands of witnesses, burned hotter than any battlefield scar. His jaw clenched, fists tightening at his sides. The wordless challenge in Elena's unwavering stance gnawed at him. She had not flinched, she had not bent, she had not backed down, and she had not acknowledged the aura of fear he was accustomed to inspiring. His mind raced. Every scenario he had imagined in training, every threat, every intimidation tactic was useless here. In front of 1,440 eyes, reputation alone was not enough. Hale stepped forward, his voice sharper, cutting across the field. "Do you even know what you're doing? Do you understand the consequences of this?" His words, though low, carried a dangerous edge. The nearby soldiers caught his tone. The murmurs returned, soft and uncertain. Some dared to hope that Elena could stand her ground. Others feared the legend might finally snap. Elena's gaze never wavered. She met him with the steady confidence of someone who had built her career on precision and discipline. "I enforce the rules," she said calmly. "That is my duty. You are not above them." Her voice rang out clearly, not loud but firm enough for the entire front row to hear. Every syllable carried the weight of regulations and years of authority. She was not asking, she was commanding. For a brief moment, time seemed to pause. Hale's eyes narrowed. The pride that had fueled him through deployments, citations, and commendations now felt like a liability. His reputation, his medals, his very presence on the base, all of it meant nothing if he could not control the situation. He could not tolerate being corrected in front of this many witnesses. Not by her. Not now. Frustration boiled into anger. His breathing grew heavier, his hands flexed, and his posture stiffened. "Do you think rules matter more than lives saved? More than experience in combat?" he spat, stepping even closer. "I've done things that would save you and your troops if you ever faced real danger. And you dare to question me." Elena did not flinch. Her response was precise, unwavering. Authority is measured by adherence to the law, not medals. Discipline protects everyone, even those who resist it. "Adjust your position, Chief, or I will escalate." The words struck Hale like a blow. Something inside him snapped. The combination of pride, humiliation, and the sheer audacity of her calm defiance overwhelmed his carefully maintained restraint. For a moment, the legend of Mason Hale, a man who had faced death countless times without fear, was reduced to a man driven by ego and unchecked anger. And then it happened. With a sudden shove, Hale propelled Elena backward. The motion was aggressive but not reckless. He wanted her off balance, intimidated. The force echoed across the parade field. Gasps rose from the formation, followed by a stunned silence. Soldiers shifted slightly, unable to fully comprehend what had just occurred. The act of physical aggression against an officer in front of thousands was unprecedented. Elena's footing wavered for a fraction of a second. Her mind raced, analyzing, calculating, responding. Every training scenario she had endured, every drill on base discipline and defensive tactics surged to the forefront. She had anticipated aggression. She had prepared, and she would not be humiliated. Hale straightened, chest heaving, eyes wild. He repeated his mantra, louder this time, ensuring the crowd heard. "Remember, I'm a Navy SEAL." The field went silent, not in awe, not in fear, but in anticipation. The thousands of soldiers, standing at rigid attention, felt the charged energy of a confrontation about to escalate beyond words. The legend of Hale was being challenged, and the outcome was uncertain. Elena's response was measured, calm, deliberate. "Chief Hale," she said, her voice unwavering even in the charged atmosphere, "your actions are unacceptable. I will not allow assault to go unchecked. You will submit to protocol." The tension was a live wire. Soldiers glanced at one another. Some instinctively reached for their sidearms, not to draw, but as a reflex to the sense of danger. Hale's pride flared violently. Every muscle in his body screamed to reassert control. And yet he had underestimated Alina. She moved first. Her training, her discipline, and her resolve converged in a single, fluid motion. Years of military police combatives, practiced countless times, guided her as she pivoted, seized his arm, and positioned herself to neutralize the threat without causing unnecessary injury. Hale's own momentum became the instrument of his restraint. In an instant, the shove that had been meant to intimidate became his undoing. Alina's grip was precise, her balance impeccable, her movement controlled, and as Hale hit the ground, face first, the shockwaves reverberated through the formation. 1,440 troops witnessed the fall of a man considered untouchable. The field was silent, except for Hale's shallow breathing and the whispering wind. Alina's voice carried across the concrete. "Chief Mason Hale, you are detained for assaulting an officer." Shock, disbelief, and awe rippled through the ranks. The man who had commanded respect through fear and reputation had been taken down with precision, discipline, and calm authority. Hale struggled briefly, instinctively, but Alina's control was absolute. For the first time, he understood that strength alone was not enough. Discipline, principle, and law held greater power than medals, ego, or battlefield experience. And somewhere in the stunned silence, the first realization dawned. The battle had changed, the rules had changed, and the legend of Mason Hale would never be the same. The echo of Chief Petty Officer Mason Hale hitting the parade field concrete lingered in the silence. 1,440 troops froze, their faces rigid with shock. Hale, the man whose reputation alone had once commanded obedience, now lay restrained by Lieutenant Alina Vargas, the Army military police officer who refused to flinch. The impact had been clean, precise, controlled, not a single ounce of rage, only the force necessary to neutralize a threat. Every soldier who had admired Hale's fearlessness now witnessed disciplined triumph over ego, and the shock was palpable. Alina's movements were fluid, a blend of calculation and instinct honed through years of combative and tactical training. Her knee anchored Hale's shoulder, her grip on his wrist firm yet controlled. She had anticipated resistance, anticipated aggression, and she anticipated this very moment. There was no cruelty in her actions, only precision. A lesson in authority, delivered not through intimidation but through mastery. Hale's chest rose and fell rapidly, a mix of anger and disbelief coursing through him. His mind, trained to survive ambushes, high-stakes operations, and firefights in foreign lands, could not reconcile the reality before him. He had been overpowered not by brute force but by principle, training, and calm resolve. Every instinct screamed to fight back, to assert dominance, to remind everyone that he was a SEAL. But in this instance, action would only compound humiliation. The parade field was eerily silent, save for the distant clink of metals and the subtle rustle of uniforms. Alina's eyes never left Hale's, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Chief Mason Hale," she said, measured and calm, "you are detained for assaulting an officer. You will remain restrained until command arrives." Her tone carried absolute authority, unshakable and immovable, echoing across the field and imprinting itself on every soldier watching. Around the field, reactions rippled like a silent wave. Some soldiers whispered under their breath, questioning whether they had just witnessed what they thought they had. The most feared operator on base, taken down in front of the entire formation. Others stared, stunned into immobility, their admiration for Hale now tinged with awe for Alina. A few officers subtly nodded in approval, recognizing the skill, composure, and adherence to protocol that had just been demonstrated. Hale struggled, the instincts of a lifetime surging through him. His arms flexed, trying to dislodge her grip. He attempted to push, to roll, to use his weight and combat training to regain control. But Alina anticipated each movement. Every shift, every push was met with a counter that used his own energy against him. In her mind, this wasn't just a takedown, it was a lesson. She could teach him without humiliation, without unnecessary harm, and she could demonstrate to 1,440 witnesses that discipline and training were more formidable than raw pride. Minutes stretched, though no one counted them. Hale's breathing grew heavier. The color in his face shifted from defiance to disbelief. He realized the truth of the situation in a visceral, undeniable way. Medals, reputation, and battlefield experience were irrelevant when confronted with authority grounded in law and principle. For the first time, the legend of Mason Hale felt mortal, fallible, human. And yet this was more than a personal defeat. It was a public reckoning. Across the field, soldiers whispered and exchanged glances. The hierarchy, the assumed invincibility of decorated warriors, had been challenged. Some wondered aloud, barely audibly, whether the culture on the base had changed in an instant. Others felt a renewed sense of discipline, a reminder that no one, no matter how decorated, was above protocol. Command officers hurried toward the scene, alerted to the confrontation. Their expressions were a mixture of concern, calculation, and professional recognition. Hale remained pinned, his breathing heavy but controlled as he assessed the unfolding consequences. The legend had been checked, and he had no choice but to comply. Even in his anger, he understood that resistance now would only worsen the outcome. Alina did not relax her hold. Her stance was perfect, her control absolute. She allowed Hale the smallest of movements, enough to remind him he was not trapped unfairly, but every shift reinforced her mastery. The act was surgical, a demonstration of power that demanded respect without a single punch thrown in malice. Her mind calculated, anticipating the arrival of the command officers and the next steps in the official procedure. As the senior officers approached, the formation remained taut, soldiers frozen in awe and anticipation. The spectacle had already transformed the atmosphere on the field. Hale, once untouchable, now required oversight. Alina's calm authority had redefined what it meant to hold power. In the eyes of every soldier watching, she had proven that true strength lies not in intimidation or reputation, but in discipline, precision, and adherence to principle. Finally, one of the commanding officers, Colonel Marcus Baines, a veteran of multiple deployments, stepped forward. His presence alone brought a subtle shift in the energy of the field. He surveyed the scene carefully, nodding subtly to Alina. "Thank you, Lieutenant Vargas. Chief Hale, you will follow procedure and report immediately for restraint and review." Hale exhaled, a long, slow release, his chest rising and falling under the weight of realization. He had been defeated in a way he had never experienced, by someone who had matched his skills with law, logic, and precise control. The 1,440 troops had witnessed the fall of a legend, and more importantly, they had witnessed the rise of another type of authority, a demonstration that discipline could command respect in ways fear never could. Alina released her grip carefully only when instructed by Colonel Baines. Hale rose slowly, his pride bruised, his ego subdued, his understanding of discipline forever altered. The field remained silent for a long moment, every soldier absorbing the lesson they had all witnessed firsthand. Rank, reputation, and fear can command attention, but respect is earned through mastery, calm resolve, and adherence to principle. As Hale was escorted to the command office for processing, Alina stood tall, clipboard still in hand. Her composure had never wavered, her actions precise and deliberate. The story of that moment would ripple through the base for weeks, months, perhaps years. And in the eyes of every soldier on that field, she had proven something far more enduring than victory in a fight. She had proven that integrity, discipline, and skill could triumph over even the most formidable ego. And somewhere, deep in Hale's mind, the first seeds of reflection and accountability began to take root. By mid-morning, The news of what had happened on the parade field spread like wildfire across Naval Station Norfolk. In offices, barracks, and mess halls, whispers replaced the usual clatter of routine. Soldiers who had been witnesses replayed the moment repeatedly, each retelling tinged with awe and disbelief. Chief Petty Officer Mason Hale, the man whose reputation had previously been untouchable, whose very presence commanded silence and respect, had been overpowered by Lieutenant Elena Vargas, pinned and detained in front of 1,440 troops. For some, it was a lesson. For others, it was a shock. Hale himself sat in a small holding room, the weight of humiliation pressing heavily upon him. His chest rose and fell in slow, uneven breaths. The adrenaline of confrontation had subsided, replaced by something far more uncomfortable: self-awareness. For the first time in years, he confronted a reality he had never allowed himself to see before. Medals, deployments, and battlefield heroics could not shield him from accountability. His mind, trained for combat, tried to rationalize, to justify, to recast the event as a misstep by Elena Vargas. But every fiber of his body knew the truth. Meanwhile, the base was alive with reaction. Some soldiers whispered fiercely in hushed tones, defending Hale's reputation. "He's a legend," one said. "You can't take him down like that. She's lucky he didn't," another interrupted, shaking his head. Others quietly nodded, acknowledging Elena's composure and control. "That was by the book," one senior NCO said. "No unnecessary force, full control. She handled it perfectly." The crowd of observers split silently between awe, fear, admiration, and disbelief. Command leadership acted quickly. Colonel Marcus Baines convened a formal investigation. The gravity of the incident demanded immediate review. Assaulting an officer, especially in front of an entire formation, could not go unchecked. The legal, procedural, and reputational implications were immense. Hale, despite his decorated history, was relieved of leadership responsibilities and placed under formal review pending the outcome of the investigation. Even in elite military circles, there was no immunity from consequence when discipline was breached. Hale, for all his bravery and heroics, found the loss of command a heavier burden than any mission in the field. He sat alone in the small, stark office, staring at the wall, replaying every moment of the confrontation. His pride had been shattered in front of thousands, his authority publicly challenged, his physical dominance negated by discipline. The humiliation was not just personal, it was public, permanent, and undeniable. Elena, on the other hand, faced her own challenges. Whispers followed her through hallways and mess halls. Questions were asked subtly, sometimes directly. Was that really necessary? Did you handle that correctly? Do you realize who you just took down? She ignored most, answered a few succinctly, and continued her duties. She had acted precisely as her training dictated. She had neutralized a threat without excess force and had upheld the law. Yet the tension of public scrutiny weighed on her nonetheless. In her mind, she knew the lesson was bigger than herself. The ripple effects extended further. Soldiers who had idolized Hale began to reconsider the nature of respect and authority. Discipline, adherence to protocol, and controlled strength suddenly became as revered as courage under fire. In brief, the culture of the base shifted. Where fear and reputation once held sway, now principle, integrity, and measured authority had proven their supremacy. Hale struggled with the implications. Every recollection of battlefield heroics and successful missions now came with the uncomfortable realization: strength without control is meaningless. Courage untempered by law and discipline could lead to downfall. And for the first time, he understood the value of restraint, the power of principle, and the authority of someone who enforced the rules without personal vendetta. Back on the parade field, the memory lingered for those who had witnessed it. Soldiers replayed Elena's measured movements, the precision of her grip, and the calm authority that had neutralized a legend. They discussed it quietly, dissecting every moment. Some whispered about lessons learned, others about potential repercussions. The consensus was clear. What had occurred would redefine respect, leadership, and authority on the base. Colonel Baines met with both Hale and Alina individually. To Hale, he was stern but professional, emphasizing accountability over punishment. The man who had once felt invincible now faced the weight of consequences he could not escape. To Alina, he was appreciative, acknowledging her skill, calm composure, and the restraint she had exercised. Leadership recognized that discipline had been demonstrated perfectly, neither unnecessarily violent nor excessive, but precise, effective, and definitive. As the investigation unfolded, Hale reflected quietly. He thought about deployments, about moments in combat where instinct and aggression had kept him alive. He considered how those same instincts had fueled arrogance, entitlement, and an overinflated sense of authority. The realization cut deep. Courage alone could not justify his actions. Discipline, law, and controlled authority were the true measures of leadership, and he had been forced to confront that lesson in front of an entire base. By the end of the day, the story had spread across the installation and beyond. Emails circulated, whispered retellings proliferated in barracks, and the lesson was repeated again and again. Soldiers who had once only admired Hale now also respected Alina for her mastery, composure, and unwavering dedication to duty. She had demonstrated what leadership truly meant: strength tempered by control, authority balanced by law, and courage paired with principle. Hale, alone in the quiet of his office, began to see the first cracks in his own ego. He realized that true leadership required accountability, humility, and the ability to recognize when pride must yield to principle. And for the first time, he understood that the field of heroes and legends was not measured by medals alone, but by the courage to face consequences, even uncomfortable ones, and the wisdom to respect those who enforce justice without fear or favoritism. Across the base, 1,440 troops carried the memory of what they had witnessed. Some carried shock, some admiration, some reflection, but every one of them would remember the day discipline had triumphed over ego, principle over pride, and the quiet authority of Lieutenant Alina Vargas over the untouchable legend of Chief Mason Hale. The first waves of ripple effects had begun. The battle had moved beyond the field. It was now a lesson in leadership, accountability, and the power of integrity, and no one who had witnessed it would ever forget. The office was silent, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the distant echo of drills on the parade field. Chief Petty Officer Mason Hale sat alone in a chair, the weight of the morning pressing down like an unrelenting tide. For hours, he replayed the confrontation in his mind. The shove, the words, the way Alina had pivoted, taken control, and grounded him with effortless authority. He had faced ambushes, machine gun fire, and improvised explosives across the globe, but nothing had cut deeper than the clarity of humiliation in front of 1,440 troops. Hale's chest rose and fell unevenly, every inhale heavy with shame. The adrenaline from combat had left him, replaced with a gnawing awareness that his pride had betrayed him. He had always believed that medals, deployments, and battlefield experience could shield him from critique. They could not. Not here, not with her. The realization was like ice in his veins. For the first time in years, he understood vulnerability, not physical but moral, professional, and deeply personal. He remembered deployments in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Pacific, moments where his instincts had saved lives, where split-second decisions had been the difference between survival and death. Those memories, once a source of pride, now seemed hollow against the knowledge that he had allowed arrogance to define him more than leadership had. Every mission he had completed, every medal he had earned, was meaningless if he could not respect authority, follow protocol, and control his temper. Alina Vargas had shown him what true strength looked like. Not the ability to fight, not the skill to kill, not the courage to face death, but the power to remain calm, disciplined, and in control under pressure. The paradox was undeniable. She had disarmed him physically, yes, but the more profound defeat was internal. She had shattered his illusions of invincibility and forced him to confront a truth he had long avoided. Authority untempered by discipline is not leadership. It is entitlement. Across the base, whispers still lingered. Soldiers repeated the story, dissecting every detail. Some of Hale's closest colleagues defended him quietly, emphasizing his history, heroics, and the stress of his responsibilities. Others silently admired Alina's composure and skill, understanding that what she had done was far more difficult than any operation in a combat zone. Leadership, they realized, could take many forms, and sometimes it came from unexpected places. Hale leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The quiet reflection was uncomfortable but necessary. He thought about the soldiers under his command, about the example he had set, or failed to set. How many times had he let pride dictate his decisions? How many moments had he mistaken fear for respect? The answers were troubling. The metal ribbons on his chest now felt heavier, symbols of accomplishment overshadowed by the realization of personal failure. Meanwhile, Alina returned to her duties with the same composure she had displayed on the parade field. She inspected records, coordinated minor drills, and interacted with soldiers, all while maintaining the same unshakable authority. Her actions were deliberate, precise, and unflappable. She had neutralized the most challenging force on base without spectacle or unnecessary harm, and yet she carried no arrogance, no gloating, no unnecessary demonstration of dominance. Her victory was quiet, professional, and absolute. Hale's mind wandered to the men and women under his command. He thought about their expectations, their reliance on him for guidance, and the subtle ways his ego had sometimes interfered with his leadership. The confrontation had stripped away illusions, leaving him raw and reflective. He realized that courage alone, however storied, could not substitute for discipline, empathy, or integrity. Leadership required more than action. It required accountability. He thought of his past mistakes, minor incidents where pride had led to conflict, opportunities missed to listen, to instruct, to enforce rules impartially. He thought about how easy it had been to intimidate through reputation, to allow fear to mask responsibility. And he realized painfully that the confrontation with Alina was not just a moment of personal humiliation. It was a catalyst, an opportunity for transformation he had been resisting. Hours passed. Hale replayed the incident in his mind repeatedly. Each iteration deepened the sting but also clarified the lesson. He had been reckless, arrogant, and unthinking. Alina had been precise, disciplined, and measured. And in front of 1,440 witnesses, that truth had been undeniable. The magnitude of her authority and the legitimacy of the law she enforced was inescapable. He exhaled slowly, the first hint of acceptance creeping in. He understood that the incident was not just about him, or even about public humiliation. It was about the principles that govern the military, about protecting order, and about demonstrating that accountability applied to all, regardless of rank, reputation, or past heroics. Respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned, consistently and without exception. As evening approached, Hale remained seated, quietly reflecting on what he had witnessed in himself and in her. Somewhere deep in that reflection, he began to feel the first seeds of humility, accountability, and transformation. For the first time, he contemplated what it truly meant to be a leader, not merely brave in battle, but disciplined, fair, and capable of acknowledging mistakes. On the parade field, Alina's example had already started influencing the soldiers who had witnessed it. Conversations in barracks and offices revolved around the principle she had demonstrated. Strength without control is weakness, and rank without respect is meaningless. Soldiers carried the lesson forward, internalizing it for themselves. And somewhere in Hale's consciousness, the realization took root. He had been defeated, yes, but the defeat was also a gift, a chance to rebuild, to reflect, and to redefine what true strength meant. The path forward was uncertain, uncomfortable, and humbling, but it was also the first step toward genuine leadership, accountability, and respect. By the end of the day, the quiet reflection settled into Hale's mind like a steady weight. The adrenaline of confrontation was gone, replaced by clarity, humility, and an understanding that real authority is earned through discipline, not fear. And in that understanding, he began the slow, difficult journey of transformation. The boardroom at Naval Station Norfolk was quiet, sterile, and filled with a sense of expectation. Rows of chairs were lined for witnesses, senior officers, and legal personnel. Hale sat at the center, his medals muted under the harsh fluorescent lights, his shoulders slightly stooped. The man who had once commanded fear and respect with a glance now felt the weight of judgment in a way no battlefield had ever delivered. Discipline, accountability, and integrity, all measured against him, hung like a sword above his head. Colonel Marcus Baines, head of the review board, opened the proceedings with formal authority. Chief Petty Officer Mason Hale, you have been brought before this board for the public assault of Lieutenant Elena Vargas on the parade field. Your actions violated military law and base protocol. Do you understand the charges against you? Hale's voice was steady, though tinged with the faintest trace of humility. Yes, sir. It was a word heavy with acknowledgement, the first real acceptance of the reality he faced. The board listened as witnesses, including soldiers who had been present on the field, provided statements. Each detail, each testimony painted a clear and undeniable picture. The shove, the verbal escalation, the public defiance, Elena's calm, precise neutralization. Every word reinforced the lesson Hale had been forced to confront privately. Authority, unchecked by law and discipline, leads to ruin, even for the most decorated. The board examined records, reviewed protocols, and discussed the precedent. Hale's career was long, illustrious, and commendable. He had saved countless lives, completed missions that had no room for error, and trained scores of soldiers in tactical operations. Yet none of this excused his actions on the parade field. The hearing reinforced a crucial principle. No one, regardless of history or heroism, was above the law. As each statement was read, Hale felt a mixture of shame, reflection, and clarity. He had always prided himself on decisiveness in high-pressure situations, but this was not high pressure in the traditional sense. This was accountability, and he was unprepared. His pride, once an asset in combat, had become a liability. The contrast between battlefield authority and base discipline had never been so vivid, so inescapable. Finally, Colonel Baines addressed the board and Hale directly. After careful review, the board has reached a conclusion. Chief Hale, you are relieved of your leadership responsibilities effective immediately. You will undergo mandatory counseling, and your future assignments will be contingent upon demonstrated accountability and adherence to military regulations. The room was silent as the weight of the decision settled. For Hale, it was not just a professional setback. It was a personal reckoning. The medals on his chest now felt heavier, symbols of accomplishment tinged with the acknowledgement that courage and heroism are insufficient without discipline, accountability, and respect. Elena sat quietly nearby, her posture unchanged, her composure absolute. She had carried no malice into the proceedings, only a commitment to principle. Her presence reinforced the gravity of the hearing, reminding every observer that discipline, skill, and adherence to protocol could check even the most legendary figures. Soldiers and officers alike absorbed the lesson. Authority does not reside in fear, ego, or reputation. It resides in the consistent application of law, ethics, and responsibility. As Hale absorbed the verdict, he reflected on his behavior, on the chain of events that had led him to this moment. He remembered the shove, the rush of anger, and the anticipation of intimidation. He remembered Elena's calm pivot, her precise control, the way she had neutralized him without unnecessary harm. And he realized that this moment, humiliating as it was, had revealed a truth he had long avoided. Leadership requires humility, self-awareness, and the courage to be corrected. Outside the boardroom, the ripple effects continued. Soldiers who had witnessed the parade field incident talked quietly among themselves. Some discussed the lesson in discipline. Others examined the notion of accountability. And while many still admired Hale's battlefield heroics, they now respected Elena's composure, judgment, and unwavering authority equally. The culture of the base, subtly but permanently, began to shift. Hale, having been escorted back to his quarters temporarily, found himself reflecting deeply on the lessons he had learned. He thought about the soldiers under his command, about how they viewed leadership and how his pride may have clouded his example. The humiliation he had endured was now a tool, a reminder that even legends are human, and even heroes can fail when ego supersedes principle. Days later, Hale stood once more on the parade field, 1,440 troops aligned in perfect formation. He approached Alina quietly, away from the formal eyes of the board. "You were right," he said, voice low but sincere. "I lost sight of what leadership really means. Today, you taught me more than any mission ever could." Alina studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Her calm eyes reflected acknowledgement, not gloating. "Leadership isn't about fear, Chief," she said softly. "It's about responsibility, discipline, and accountability. Strength is measured by how well you control it, not by how much you have." The soldiers standing at attention watched the exchange silently, absorbing the lesson without interruption. They witnessed something more than the fall of a legend. They witnessed the emergence of understanding, humility, and accountability in a man whose reputation had once been absolute. Hale straightened, his posture no longer defensive but contemplative. The weight of pride had been replaced with a subtle, tempered respect, not only for the law, but for those who enforce it with skill, fairness, and courage. The event would echo across the base, becoming a defining moment in military culture for years to come. The board had acted, discipline had been restored, respect had been redefined, and Hale, the legendary Navy SEAL, had finally begun the process of reconciling ego with accountability, heroism with humility, and strength with true leadership. Weeks had passed since the confrontation on the parade field at Naval Station Norfolk. The echoes of that day still lingered in the minds of every soldier, officer, and support staff who had witnessed it. Hale had returned to duty, but in a new capacity, temporarily relieved of frontline leadership while undergoing reflection, counseling, and retraining. The man who had once relied solely on battlefield skill now navigated the intricate balance between authority, discipline, and respect. The base, too, had changed. Soldiers walked with a subtle but perceptible shift in understanding. Discipline was no longer abstract, spoken of only in manuals or during drills. It had been demonstrated in front of them live, with precision and consequence. Lieutenant Alina Vargas had become an unspoken symbol of principle in action. Her calm composure, measured authority, and flawless execution of the takedown became a case study in leadership across the installation. Hale spent long hours reflecting in the training rooms and empty parade fields. The incident had forced him to confront not just his pride, but the consequences of ego unchecked by law. He replayed the moment over and over. The shove, his own reaction, Alina's pivot, the control she maintained, and the silence of the troops as the lesson unfolded. Every detail carried a lesson. Every action held meaning. He had faced enemy fire countless times, but no operation had taught him humility, accountability, and leadership more effectively than that single moment. One morning, Hale approached Alina quietly in the command office. She was reviewing reports with the same methodical precision she had displayed on the field. "Lieutenant Vargas," he began, voice steady but tinged with gratitude, "I wanted to thank you again, not just for the confrontation but for what it taught me. I understand now that strength without control is meaningless." Alina looked up, her eyes calm and unreadable. She nodded slowly. "Chief, leadership is not about being untouchable. It's about accountability. It's about setting an example that others can follow, even when no one is watching. Courage is meaningless if it is not tempered with discipline." The exchange was quiet, almost private, but its impact radiated outward. Hale's willingness to acknowledge the lesson he had learned set a new tone for the base. Soldiers who had once only admired his feats now saw him differently. Respectfully, yes, but with the knowledge that even legends could learn, adapt, and change. The story of that confrontation was no longer about humiliation. It was about transformation. Over the next few weeks, Hale engaged in formal leadership retraining, workshops on conflict resolution, and counseling sessions that addressed not only his behavior, but his underlying assumptions about authority, ego, and respect. Each session peeled back layers of pride and habit, revealing a leader who had long relied on reputation rather than consistent principle. Elena, meanwhile, continued her duties without fanfare, embodying a model of authority that was both firm and fair, always measured, always professional. The ripple effects extended across the ranks. Soldiers discussed the incident in small groups, analyzing Elena's movements, her calm authority, and the sequence of events. They debated the lessons learned, identifying key takeaways for their own careers. Discipline, they realized, was not a theoretical concept. It was a lived experience, demonstrated and reinforced in real time. Respect, they saw, was earned through consistency, fairness, and mastery, not intimidation or fear. Hale himself began mentoring younger soldiers in a new way. He emphasized humility, self-reflection, and adherence to protocol alongside tactical skill. His lectures were no longer infused with ego or tales of heroics. Instead, they focused on the principles Elena had exemplified: control, discipline, accountability, and calm authority. Soldiers responded with attention and engagement, recognizing the transformation in a man they had once idolized purely for fear and reputation. Months later, the base held another formation, this time for routine inspection. Hale and Elena both stood on the field, their presence commanding respect, not through intimidation, but through consistent example. The 1,440 troops present were reminded of that moment weeks earlier, not as a tale of confrontation, but as a lesson etched in discipline, courage, and principle. Hale's posture had changed. His bearing no longer radiated arrogance but steady authority shaped by reflection. Elena's calm presence remained a quiet benchmark of leadership excellence. In private moments, Hale admitted to himself the profound truth he had learned. Skill, bravery, and medals are important, but they do not define a leader. True authority is earned through consistency, accountability, and respect for the rules that govern the group. Pride unchecked is dangerous. Discipline applied judiciously is transformative. And sometimes the greatest lessons come not from the battlefield, but from someone willing to challenge you in a moment of quiet authority. The base's culture evolved subtly but undeniably. Respect for authority became linked with adherence to law, fairness, and self-control rather than fear or reputation alone. Soldiers carried the memory of that day in their minds, applying it in drills, exercises, and daily interactions. Leaders at all levels internalized the principle that no one is above consequence, and that humility strengthens authority rather than diminishes it. As Hale walked the parade field one evening, he paused and looked at the empty rows where thousands of troops had once stood. The sun set, casting long shadows across the polished concrete. He thought about Elena Vargas, the calm, precise, and unwavering officer who had changed the course of his career and reshaped the understanding of leadership on the base. He smiled faintly, quietly acknowledging a debt that could never be repaid with words alone. In the end, the story was not about confrontation, nor was it about ego. It was about principle, courage, and the quiet power of discipline. The legend of Mason Hale remained, but it had been refined, tempered, and humanized. And the example of Lieutenant Elena Vargas endured, reminding every soldier that true leadership is measured not by fear, medals, or reputation, but by integrity, composure, and the strength to do what is right, even when it is the hardest choice to make. The sun disappeared behind the horizon, but the lessons of that day, the fall, the restraint, the transformation, would remain etched in the minds of every person who had witnessed it. Discipline had triumphed, principle had prevailed, and the base had learned that strength, when balanced with humility, is the truest form of power.